You are still watching News Plus. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now, representatives of the Zimbabwe Teachers Association today met with legislators to advocate for increased funding for the education sector in the next year's budget. The 2025 national budget will be presented by Finance Minister Mthuli Ncube later on this year.
The public education sector is shrinking globally, with private education gaining ground, but often at an unaffordable cost to many. In response, educators worldwide, including those in Zimbabwe, are pressing governments to increase funding for public education. The Zimbabwe Teachers Association engaged legislators on this earlier today.
That the budget allocations have stagnated, and our observation is that these have stagnated for the last 40 years. And because of that stagnation, we are getting worried that public education is now suffocating. And when public education receives low resources, it means that the general public will therefore be denied the right and the access to quality public education for all.
Last year, Zimbabwe allocated 12.42% of its national budget to education. The figure falls far below the global recommendations of 20% of the national budget. Insufficient funding has led to poor standards in some schools in Zimbabwe. Primary and Secondary Education Portfolio Committee Chairperson says there is need for sustainable funding to the education sector.
We must develop mechanisms that ensure long-term financial support for education. This includes forging strategic public-private partnerships, creating dedicated education development funds, and establishing transparent financial managed systems that inspire public confidence.
Calls for increased funding for education are nothing new, but they have gone unmet over the years. Parliament's Budget and Finance Portfolio Committee Chairperson Clemens Chidua says the reality seems to be that the national purse is not big enough to satisfy all sectors. He says his committee will prioritize pushing for timely disbursements of whatever Treasury allocates to education for next year.
I think the major recommendation that we can make as Parliament is whatever has been allocated should be disbursed. I think the major issue that we are having at the moment is where allocations have been done, we have not seen much traction or on the ground in terms of the disbursements. So the executive should disburse whatever has been allocated.
Legislators head to Bulawayo tomorrow for the National Pre-Budget Workshop, where they will present their recommendations to government before the announcement of the 2025 national budget expected later this year. Cheryl Munjenjema for ZTN News at Parliament.
Now, the Zimbabwe School Examinations Council says exams have managed to go this far without any reports of leakages. Spokesperson Nikki Dlamini gave us an update on the ongoing exams, with indications the board is trying to polish up its act.
The various security measures which we have since put into place, starting with the year of 2023 and continuing now in 2024, have seen a complete decline in examinations malpractice, particularly the biggest one, which was the pre-access to examination papers, which is leakages. So we see that we have seen now, because of the increased security as well as the monitoring team, which include the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, the Zimbabwe Republic Police, as well as state security and ZimSec officials, have managed to suppress the paper leakages.
Now, with 20 days to go before the end of exam sittings, ZimSec says any minor hiccups have been dealt with accordingly.
There were no paper leakages reported during the examinations that have been written thus far. The only leakage, which is not a leakage of a question paper, but there was a teacher who did circulate advanced information for a science subject. He was reprimanded, taken to the police, and he did appear before the courts and was charged for contravening the ZimSec Act. Malpractice cases that we have come across in the schools are cases of impersonation. Impersonation is when someone pretends to be the candidate and goes into the examination room to write the exam on behalf of the candidate. Culprits were reprimanded and taken to the police station, and in various cases, they did also appear before the courts of law, being charged with intervening the HRS Act.
Now, there have been some disturbing cases of misconduct among school authorities around the country. These cases have cast a spotlight on the country's education system. To discuss the subject, we are now joined live by Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education spokesperson, Taonga Ndoro. Good evening, Mr. Ndoro. Thank you for joining us here on News Plus. Now, during this examination period, one of the issues that dominated headlines was on the theft of examination fees. What is your position as a ministry?
Well, the issue of those headmasters, you're talking of headmasters that do not have ZIMSEC registration centers, and then they collect examination fees from parents to go and register at an examination center. It remains our clarion call to all parents to ensure that the registration of their children is in order when they receive a statement of entry. There is no candidate that will get into an examination without a statement of entry. This is why when the registration process is done, the candidate is given a statement of entry. Parents should not wait until the last minute to say, okay, when it's the day of the examinations, then they get surprises when their children are not able to write. They should obtain the statement of entry several months before the start of the examination.
Now, Mr. Ndoro, there's also a headmaster in the courts for alleged rape. Are the children safe?
We have a very robust education system that provides quality education to all our pupils, and some of these processes we even explain to our children that even when they write their examinations, when they write in on their answer sheet, they don't even write their name, they only write their candidate number. So they cannot be duped by anybody who will say, I am a ZIMSEC marker, because there is hardly any way of remembering the candidate number of the candidate's paper which they are marking. So there are very strict control measures that cannot make it possible for any of our children to get duped unless there are other underlying cases that may be affecting that child or that teacher to behave in that way.
Well, thank you to Mr. Ndoro for answering those questions for us.